I want to show you what wintry Alaska looks like here right now, March 7th, 2015. We have had less than 5 inches of snow, depending upon who you talk to. This is out my back window. And posted basically temperatures in the 20s to 40s. Though it does get down to a minus occasionally, which it will next week. Anyway, I love this winter. I hope we have another one. Sorry, East Coast. Welcome to Chucky's Corner. Alright, now, as some of you can see, some of the things I have, I've started to get most of my stuff I'm going to build my computer. I've already mounted the Z87 M-Power Max on my board. I'll start putting things together and testing it. And I'll talk about that later. And some of the tools I'm going to use is a screwdriver. Normally all you'll need is a Phillips. Ideally you want one with a magnetic tip. Occasionally you will need a small straight slot because there are some very ignorant engineers out there that actually send me things with screws with flat tips. Shame on you. I don't buy from you if I know who you are. You'll need a knife to cut boxes open. There's also something else you'll need that when I watch other people, they don't have. It's a really cool, probably 10-15 bucks at the most. It's called a power supply tester. Now today's topic is really just common sense things, but I want to talk about this for a bit. I watched several videos today. I'm trying to think about maybe on one of my units I'm going to do doing my own cooling system, which is actually more expensive than doing a self-contained one. But it'd be fun to learn. One of the things I saw from several was they tried to check out some of their system with a fully powered up system. They'd be tearing in their CPU on and off, on and off, on and off. You don't have to do that if all you're doing is needing to check your pump, your fans, these two things. You get one of these guys. Now what it does is it allows you to hook up your 24-pin motherboard connector, 20, 24, depending upon which one you have. All the power supply, and I'll be putting in this AX1500, all the power supply is doing is looking for a ground loop back to turn on. That's all it's doing. Every one of them is built the same. I haven't run on one yet. If I do, well, then I'll give you another video. So if I want to check my stuff before I actually put it on, I just want to make sure I have all the voltages out on my power supply. And so I just hook this up, power it up, and it will show me my voltages. Now there is a caveat to this, and that is this will not produce a load on your power supply. So if you're using it for troubleshooting, which is usually when people go and buy it because they're troubleshooting, this will not produce a load, but it's good for checking your voltage out from all your connections, and through a troubleshooting method, if you do think you have a load problem, then you'll use this. But, and I can't believe I kept seeing people do this, okay? I've got Corsair fans. I love Corsair fans, except I think they need to shoot some engineers because they don't come with the airflow arrow on them. None of them did. Okay? Seriously, Corsair? Okay. And so you assume, you know what happens when you assume? You can remember what the blade configuration looks like for intake exhaust, or you assume that the sticker that says Corsair is on the outflow tank, outflow. That's ridiculous. Okay, so what I will do is I test out all my parts before I put them in, and this is what I saw happening with a lot of amateurs quite frankly, is they would stick their fans in, hook up all the power supplies. They're working in this little box, and a fan don't work. You know what? Before you put your fans in, use your power supply. Use this baby to get your power supply up and running, and hook some power to your fans. Check them, see if they're working, and if they're not marked with an airflow, mark them with an airflow arrow. So that's a tip on that. Now what I want to talk about today is some of the other stuff that I've run in. Like I said, I've been in this over 40 years in various forums. Is when you're going to design a system. Okay, this is my first gaming PC. Okay, and I've been asked by somebody to build one for them. I guess because I won't charge them money, but they're going to pay some parts. So I sit down with my friend. I said, "Okay, tell me what you want." He says, "Well, I want to do gaming." Yeah. Okay, I'll give you an iPad. How's that? I mean, you know, he had no concept. I said, "Well, I want one like," he named a friend of ours. And I said, "Okay, you do realize his is 10 years old, right?" "Well, yeah." "I would assume you want one a little bit older than him, or go make him an unreasonable large amount offer. He'll give you his and he'll go buy a new one, you know." So you've got to sit down and think about it. And I've had these conversations over the years with various people. Several decades ago when I was in consulting, a lawyer's office called me and says, "Hey, could you, I need to automate our office. Can you come and talk to me about it?" I says, "Okay." So I looked at what he had. I said, "Okay, I've made some notes. I'll go look." He says, "Well, I really want the one with my friend Matt." I said, "Okay." Now I thought Matt would be a lawyer. No, he was a dentist. Really, a dentist. I said, "Okay." So I went over and looked at Matt's and came back and said, his system's not going to work for you. Okay, a computer is a computer. That's true. But you know, you're also dealing with software, the whole 9 yards. He said, "No, I want one like Matt's." I says, "Well, there's no way I can give you one like Matt's because it's totally incompatible with what your office needs and what you do." So he said, "Well, thank you very much." He was very nice, never called me back. About a year later, I got through some grapevines news that he went out and hired a guy, he did, who went and spec'd out Matt's computer and installed Matt's computer, and everything was installed except for one DVD problem. Software wasn't there. And so he was upset. "Well, okay, I'll go buy you Matt's software." Okay. And he did, and he paid for dental software that won't work in a lawyer's office. Okay. Now this is not an uneducated person. Many years ago, he paid very dearly to be educated. Okay. But there's some common sense things when you sit down and build a system, whether it's a PC system or it's a big mega simulator system. There's some common sense things. Everything when you start out, there's basically only 3 primary areas. And I wrote them down because otherwise I'll forget them, but I just do them by nature. That's hardware, duh. Software, duh. Expandability. Positive and negative expandability. Now I'm going to talk more about that. But what expandability means is you need to sit down and think about 5 years from now, what do you want to be? Because in the CPU business, the hardware business, especially right now, the life expectancy of the current stuff is about five years before they come out with something big. Now, that was true, but lately with this recession and everything, I don't care what the White House says, with the recession and everything, there's been some really slowdown on R&D stuff. And so I bought, what did I do with it? Here it is. I bought the Intel i7 4790K, the Devil's Canyon one. Okay, and it's specifically made for gaming and stuff like this. But it's really, you go and look at YouTube and Jay's 2 cents and others who spec this. And you'll find that it's really an enhanced upgrade, hardware upgrade, okay? That's really what it is. And that's good, and that's the kind. So this 4700 series has evolved up, and so whether it's a 770 or whatever, okay, it's evolved up hardware-wise, heating-wise, and of course when you're clocking, especially when you get up to the 3 to 4 and above clocking, cooling is absolutely, positively a must. You can't go cheap on cooling. And then if you're going to overclock, you can't go cheap on cooling, okay? But because it's been out in the market now for a couple of years, unless something really happens in Intel and AMD, same thing. Unless something really, you won't see it evolve to the next real evolution of CPU design for another 5 or so years. So this one is good for 5 to 7 years, easily. Okay, and it's worth the money. You can, it's the same price for the 4790 and the 4790K were almost identical in price. So get this one. So I know 5 to 7 years from now in the CPU area, don't have to worry about it. Okay. If you've got a lot of money and you're not dealing with budgets, okay, I'm dealing with a $2,000 budget, okay, then you can go out and buy the top of the line. You can buy all the stuff that's still got bugs in it, the top of the line graphic card, motherboard, all of this type of stuff. If you do that, buy a reputable manufacturer that has been in the business for at least 5 to 10 years. MSI, Asus, Gigabyte, those have been in for a long time. And they're tried and true and these type of things. And then also go and research it. I've been doing a lot of researching. So the first thing you have to do is sit down and make up a priority list of where you're going to spend your money. Okay, and I've listed, let me read them to you and I'll talk about 6 things. 6 things. Okay, I'll do this, but that's actually somebody else. 6 things that you really need to sit down and balance in your money. And actually 7 combined 2. One is your video card. Okay, if you're going to be a gamer, you need to invest in a really top-notch video card. Now, gaming is secondary to me. I do a lot of graphic rendering, be working on Blender, these type of things. The graphic card is not number 1, it's actually number 2 for me. Okay, but I'll talk about that. CPU, number 2, CPU with cooling, that's where that 7th one comes in. With cooling. This comes with a fan. Okay. I use it as a spare for testing. It is not going in my system. You need a cooling system. And the truth is, the cooling systems now, self-contained cooling systems, are really come down in price. So they're really worth doing and putting in there. And then, of course, cooling motherboard, memory, the case, and power supply. I want to talk about those. I'm going to leave this here so I can kind of look at it. Video card. Like I said, I am not, gaming is number 2 with me. Rendering is number 1 with me. Therefore, I have to put more of my money in the CPU, motherboard, memory area. Okay. And so video card actually is number 4, in my priority scheme. But for my friend who wants a gaming computer, the video card's important. Okay. When you talk about video card, you need to also take into account what you're going to hook up to it. Now you say, well, duh, I'm going to hook up a monitor. Yeah. How many? What's their inputs? Do you want to daisy chain them? These type of things. See, my friend never thought about, well, his friend has 3 monitors. Okay, that's really cool. He's got 3 monitors, 1 video card. But his resolution sucks. The reason it does is because he uses display output. Okay, and if you haven't done any daisy chaining using display, you have to, there is a formula for how high a resolution you can go with depending upon how many monitors you put in that daisy chain. And just because it has a display port into the monitor doesn't mean it's a chainable monitor. You know, so that's, you know, you've got to sit down and think about it. So why his friend did not use, ready for this, an HDMI DVI output and the daisy and the display. He could have had all 3. He could have set it up so that they all 3 did what he needed them to do, and he would not have had to mess with lower resolution. So I don't know if he went back and told him or not. I don't know. Okay, so for me, HDMI is important because I'm actually going to have 3 monitors. I'm going to have 2 HDMIs and a DVI. Okay, or I could put a display port up there too. And the reason being is really simple, because I want to be able to watch and hear movies above me while I'm playing with my game, my stuff down below. That's how I'm going to do it. Okay. So, but for my friend, I said, what are you going to do about monitors? Well, he had some old monitors, which was fine. One of them had a HDMI and a DVI, the other one had a DVI and a VGA, and I said, okay, you need to sit down and think about whether you want to update your monitors, because if you do, then you're going to have to put that on your priority list, because that's going to affect your budget. And there's some ways you can get around it. So, you know, you got to sit down and at least draw on a piece of paper your video card output to where you want to go, what you want to do with it. That'll help you determine the video card you buy. Not whether it's a 900 series, 700, 600, whatever it is. Not that. It's the output. Because what these guys do is they'll create a 970 card, for example, with different types of outputs, depending upon what you. That's why you got all these model numbers. Okay. Now I know some of you may be watching going, duh, but trust me, there's somebody going to watch this and say, I did not know that. Okay. So you think about it. Okay. The biggest reason to go to HDMI, primary is for stereo. That's really primary. If you're not worried about sound, if you're going to use the sound output of your motherboard, DVIs are fine. DVIs will give you the same resolution output, not a problem. And then same thing with the display. But remember, I mean, if you put one out with display, it's like putting an HDMI. So you do some of them I understand do sound, but not a big deal with me. But the other thing is, the reason you don't want to go cheap on the video card is because if you're going to put multiple monitors on there, that card has to have the power to drive them. Okay, which leads us eventually to that power supply problem. Some video cards come with 2 power connectors. It's just not the connector, you know, the bottom pins you put in. But you actually have to put your power supply input to it. And some come with 1. Okay, as a general rule, 2 power connectors are better than 1 power connector. Okay. You want to, if you're going to be a gamer, you want to get up in that top end, that 900 level, spend the money for it, but get one that has time tested. That means it's been on the market and people have been using it for at least 2 to 3 years. And like I said, you can go to YouTube, go to Jay's 2 Cents, there's a couple of tech places I mentioned earlier, see my other video, and they'll give you a good review and some of the pros and cons. And specifically look for people that have got your monitor type configuration. In other words, 2 or 3 monitors hooked to it. So if you're going to go that way, you've got to go with a more wattage power supply, current power supply. I'll talk about that. I think my thing just died. Nope, it didn't. Something went on there. Anyway, so video card, CPU. Like I said, don't go cheap on your CPU. For video gaming, I would highly recommend you go at least quad core. You know, mine is quad core, 8 threads. Okay, just go there. Clockable's good. Don't worry about overclocking, because the newer ones, like I got MSI, so I can actually do the automatic clocking thing, and I don't have to go in there and play with the BIOS clocking capability. It actually comes with a command center, and I can go in there and do everything. So if you go look at clocking, how to fine-tune your clocking stuff, it will scare the hell out of you if you're the first time. It really will. So I thought, okay, I need to study this, and there's a couple that are really good. Jay's 2 Cents has a real good one. But then I started looking at the MSI Command Center and all of that, MSI Command Center, and for novices like me, beginners like me, that's the way to go. Okay. I'll talk more about the motherboard when I get to it in another video. Like I said, cooling, I'll be going with the Corsair H100i, and I'm going to be doing push-pull, so that means I'm going to have a fan on top of the radiator and a fan on the bottom, which leads me, I said I'm going to be mixing some of these to the case. I saw a guy on YouTube who did a push-pull with a mid-tower. Okay. A mid-tower has a lot of room, and that is true. But if you're going to do push-pull, you really need to think about spending the money for a good high-tower case. Now, on the high-tower case, make sure that you actually can put a fan on top of the thing and put its cover over, which is why I bought the NZXT Phantom Full Tower. Okay, that was one of the reasons. Okay, because I can do push-pull, still put my cover on, and it looks cool. Also, when you deal with fans, you must deal with negative, positive, and neutral pressure. Now, Jay's 2 Cents has a lot on that, and I'll just leave it to that. You want to be positive. Absolutely, not only because of what he was talking about, but I have 40 years of experience, let me tell you. I've had more. We have a system right now that for some reason the pressure inside these cabinets are neutral. We haven't figured out why. We're still kind of working on it. But neutral means it's not getting rid of the heat. Negative means it's keeping the heat trapped in. You know, so to fix this problem right now, basically we take the sides out so at least the heat dissipates into this huge room. It's a really crazy thing. It sounds like a simple fix, but it's been going on quite a while, and it's become a bit of a nightmare. But then the company I work for decided, heck, we're just going to give you a whole new visual system. Okay, I can do that. I can live with that. But we know what the problem is. We just don't know what's causing the problem. So when you put your own system together, you must do positive pressure, positive airflow. And so go to Jay's 2 Cents, and he has a really good one on that. Motherboard. Motherboard, I want to say they're equal, and that's not really true. When you go to, like what I did with the MSI, you can do it with Gigabyte, Asus stuff. They have the compare thing. So once you decide your IOs, your video cards, stuff like that, if you want to do double I/O cards, some people do that with SLI or Crossfire. That's fine. If you then you need to go find one that's designed that. My experience tells me have 3 PCIe 16 slots. You know, 3, because what happens is one of the slots is so close into the memory and the CPU area that when you start loading that area up in the memory, and let me show you what I'm talking about. I'm talking about this area right here. See how close this is right here? Okay. You start putting a video card here, then you're going to have problems with heating. You're going to have problems with closeness and working inside the thing. That's why a video card, always get one with a back on it, a backing. That's not just your connectors, but a really nice back that has a nice clean back for protection, flow, reflection, all that type of stuff. This has 3. It has 4, I think 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 PCIs ones, which I'll probably never use. But my experience is the 3 PCI 16s are, that's really what you need to do. If you get the one with the 2, there are a couple cards where the slots are farther away from the CPU. That's a good one. Okay. But other than that, if you're going to do overclocking, just make sure that the board will handle overclocking. Okay. Now, let me also tell you something about overclocking, which will scare the hell out of some of you. I don't think there's an exception to this. There may be, but the warranties will tell you that though the card or memory or CPU or whatever is designed for overclocking, if you overclock, the warranty is void. Read it. It's in writing. Okay. So that's why I said when you first get your system, put it together. It'll default to the basic clocking and everything, and we'll talk about that later. Memory. Okay. Now, most of the motherboards now that you would get, they max out at 32 gigabytes. I have one that maxes out. It has 4 slots, and it's 32 gigabytes. If you're gaming, if that is what you're going to do, unless you really want to spend the money, don't bother with anything beyond 16 gigabytes. Every one of the reviews, every one of the bench tests, every one of those said, without exception, that I looked at a number, said that you get almost no real FPS above 16 gigabyte. You just don't. Because everything's done in your video card. Okay? Everything's done in your video card. So, spend your money on your video card, get some good 16 gigabyte, 2.8s or, whatever you want. The other thing is that unless you're going to get into overclocking and your PC, obviously I'm going to have to do some editing. For some reason my, not sure they can see, I should check that. Obviously I'm going to have to do some editing because somewhere along the line the camera turned off. I'm not sure if it's a battery problem. It's not giving me a battery problem. So I'm not really sure where I ended on the last one. So let me just pick up a bit. I started on a motherboard. Like the video card, get a motherboard that the company's been around a while, research the problems. I went with Z87 because it'll do everything I need. Z97s on the MSI Z97. They're a good card. But there's a couple reviews I really wasn't happy about. So I think MSI, I think on their Z97 cards and even the other Z97 cards, I think you're going to see in the next year or so they're going to come up with some firmware changes. They're going to come up with some things to fix compatibility problems. But Z87 has been out for a while and tested and these type of things. I like the MSI Z87 because it has a dual BIOS switch, a physical switch, so I can, when I build it, I'll put my BIOS into BIOS A, get everything running, And then I'll go ahead and put the same BIOS in BIOS B side as switch side. If you've ever troubleshooted BIOS problems, you know they're a pain in the butt. Okay, so what's nice is if I think I have a BIOS problem, then I can just depower, throw the switch to the other BIOS that's protected, and bring it up and, you know, disconnect everything so it only comes up in BIOS, and then go and run my checks and stuff like that and see if it's a BIOS problem. Okay, if it is, if everything's running good, then I'll just reload BIOS A and then continue troubleshooting, and 9 times out of 10, by the time you're done with BIOS problems, it is a BIOS problem. The other thing I liked is that its outputs match what my requirements for my video outputs eventually became my graphics card, 2 HDMIs and these things. And this is again why you kind of got to know what you want to attach graphics wise to your system. Because one of the things, even though there are different models and they give a different description, one of the things I keyed on was that in the graphics card, board card, the outputs were different. Okay, they were slightly different, you know, and that's important to me. It may not be important to you, but it's important to me. And so the M-Power Max met my requirements. My friend who I'm going to build one for, he's going to go with the Z87. I think he's going to go with the Gaming 7. He may actually go with one of the other ones. We're still working on that. But it's a Z87. I'm not happy recommending Z97 to him right now. But hey, you got the money, go for it. It's a little bit more expensive. Memory-wise, again, it's overclock capability on the motherboard, so I can put overclock memory on there. That's very important because if nothing drives me much more, and I've looked at the reviews, and they all still do the same thing. You might buy a 24K memory frequency, but when you plug it in, you go check it, you're going to find it's not 24. Okay, it's probably down around 13, 16. That's because they tend to default to a lower range. And the nice thing, and that was always a complaint by computer people, is that, you know, why am I spending the money for a 2600 memory card, and I stick it in, I run my tests, and I can never get to 2600. Okay, that's where overclock started coming in. And they need to buy that. They need to do that. Okay. But don't be surprised you stick your memory in, it's going to be less than what you actually paid, thought you were getting, and you will have to go in and adjust it, and that's another nice thing about it. I also want to say about the motherboard, unless you really know what you're doing, you should try to match the graphics manufacturer, that's why I got MSI, with your motherboard. You'll have far less compatibility problems, okay, unless you really know what you're doing, okay. And MSI has just as compatible or comparable specs to any of the other ones you might get, and they have both AMD and Intel's. The other thing with memory is you should get a good quality memory. Vengeance is good. What did I buy? I bought Ballistic. Okay, Ballistic. I bought Ballistic because I want the LEDs on top, so I paid a little bit more for those. Not as much as the retail is, but they are brand new. And motherboard will go 32 gigabytes, overclock. Now, if you're gamers, I'm probably going to get some comment about this. If you're going into gaming, don't bother going past 16 gigabytes. Don't bother spending the money there. Because when you go look at the reviews right now, you know, gamers, you like to really get that frames per second up. Put the money in your video card, because that's really where the big difference is. Okay, your frames per second. All of the test bench reviews I read that I watched, and there's probably at least a dozen of them, comparing, you know, the memory and the usage and stuff like that, 16 gigs is more than enough. Okay, high quality, good quality, 16 gigabytes. Anything, you know, it's negligible. Anything over 2,400 is get you the for cost wise. That's what we're talking about, cost wise. So put your money in your video card. Now, for me, gaming is not number one. For me, video, graphics rendering, all of that stuff is number one. That eats up a lot of memory. So I am maxing out my memory, and I just didn't want to pay the price for a 3K Hertz memory card. So I went with 24, I think it's 24. And I can overclock it, that's nice, I can overclock it. Everybody talked about, they can get 28, you know, easily out of it without hurting the system. And then the other thing about the video card, CPU, motherboard, memory, all of that, when you tune it, if you've never tuned, go and read up on all of this type of stuff. You always tune and test your CPU first, then CPU to memory, then CPU, memory, video card. Okay, you've got to get those tuned together, and very simply, it takes a while because you need to go in and run it against your programs you're running, your Steam programs, and max it out. Now there's some really good test points that I'll give you in the ballpark range, but there's a lot of some good video cards, video things in YouTube, and so do those. Now on the case wise, this is the one I couldn't believe. Because you're doing cooling, if you're going to do single fan cooling like this is, then a mid-sized case is fine. Okay, but I want to do push-pull. Okay, push-pull. And I saw a couple videos where guys got mid towers and they decided to try to do push-pull, and one of them, because of the top of the case, this whole push-pull system that he put on there had to be inside the case. And he was actually butting up right against his motherboard and memory. There was just no room, and that's not really good for heat dissipation. You really want some extra room. Now, if you do get a mid case, you want to do push-pull. Make sure that the top of the case, when it comes off, you can put the fan in and you can put the top of the case back. Otherwise, it looks kind of stupid, to tell you the honest truth. That's why I went with NZXT, because of that top part, and I can do that. I also went with a taller case, number one, because I got it for the same price as mid case, so dollar-wise it saved me. And number two, you know, I just don't have the skinny fingers to get in, and I need some room in there when I move things around. And I don't like tearing everything apart to get something out necessarily. And so those are what things I do. Also on the case, and this goes back to cooling, make sure you set up your fan system and your cooling system for positive airflow. Don't go neutral, don't go negative. Now again, Jay's 2 Cents has a really good video on air pressure, and you want to do that. So I have a 200 and 120 and a 140 pushing in. I have a 140, 200, and 120 pulling out, and there's a difference between airflow and static pressure. You want static pressure up against anything that you're going to push the air through, any obstruction. And so obviously I want static pressure going up through the radiator. I can have airflow on top, but not pushing through. The front one has to be static pressure because it's pushing through one of the cages inside. NZXT does make a modular one where you can take some of those cages out if you don't need them, and then you can substitute the airflow, and that's fine. But your back can be airflow, sides can be airflow, because there's no real obstruction. Okay. Try to put your power supply, they tell you can go fan down, fan up. I go fan up. I always go fan up. because I want it to pull from the side and push up through. Okay, some people like fan down because oh, you can get the cool outside thing, and that's true. What they tend to forget to do is go do maintenance on it, which I'll do a thing on maintenance, and this gets clogged up with dust, and dust is a really no-no in an enclosed or semi-enclosed fan system. And it's harder to tear the thing apart to get dust out. Okay, so and it heats up your power supply. So case-wise, if you can afford it, I would go ahead and get the high tower, but mid-tower would be fine. But if you get a mid-tower, really look at the CPU cooling configuration and where things. That's you can't skimp on that area, because in the long run, that is what helps you with your maintaining your CPU and your cooling and your gaming, and you'll have less dollar problems. The other thing is power supply. A couple decades ago, the rule of thumb was very simple. You calculate your wattage of your system, get an estimate of what your whole system's wattage is, and you multiply it by 2. And the reason you multiply it by 2 is simply because of that 5-year stretch. Fans were bearings and stuff deteriorating. You'll get less airflow. Components were deteriorating, and 5 years is about where you start seeing all that aging start taking effect. Now, if you want to push that 5 to 7 years because of the need for cooling and good power flow, I would go about 3.5, minimum 3.5. Now, I actually was able to buy a brand new, thank you who sold it to me, ATX 1500 Platinum, 7-year warranty on it, for the same price as the 1200 AX 1200. And so I scoffed that dude up real quick. Didn't even go into bidding, just bought it. Okay. But my friend's got a 1250. And the reason being is he wants to eventually add on a second video card, okay, that is another max good huge power draw. And this is where I said expandability. You got to think what you want to do 5 years from now. So he knows he wants to put on a double video card. Okay, so when you calculate up your wattage, you really need to calculate up as where you believe you're going to be 5 years from now. And 5 years from now, he wants to be at that double video card. So you have to add that into the calcs. And then I say bump it up one level. Okay, that's what I say. Because the truth is, the less draw current-wise this has on it, the longer it will last. The only thing that's going to take this sucker out is, quite frankly, if a hard drive or something shorts, or but that's why you go modular, because now the modulars, and you definitely want to go modular, the modulars are all protected. Each line is protected, whereas in the old days only the power supply was protected. So these have internal fuses, and so if you're troubleshooting, you find out one of your outputs is bad, most of the time it's going to be simply a fuse that's inside. Most of the time you're going to have a spare line. That's where this comes in handy, and you just take and hopefully you stick it on another line and it runs. Okay, but if the fuse was blown, I'll guarantee you probably got a problem with what's attached. And you might want to think about replacing it, because usually what you're talking about is an optical drive, a hard drive, or something like that. And I will guarantee you it is less costly to change that out than to go in and change this out or tear it apart and replace it. Okay, if you don't know what you're doing with power supplies, find someone to do it for you. Okay. Other things to take into account. Now those are the 6, 7 things. Remember, I combine cooling with CPU. Those are the things you need to put down on your list, and those are the things you need to lay against your budget and buy for. Okay, just buy it right off the bat. Don't even go into the other stuff until you get that stuff, or pay for it's on the way. Because then you're not tempted to go skimp, because you'll say, oh, I want this, but oh, it's a little bit more money. Oh, okay, well, I'll go a little cheaper on this area. No, these areas you don't want to go cheap on, but you want to decide where your priority is. If you're a gamer, your priority is going to be your video card, motherboard, cooling, CPU, that type of stuff. That's where your priority is going to be. Video card for me is down on number 4, so that's why I went with the 670. Okay, so other things eventually you're going to add to your system, and you can kind of work this out what you want, is what do you want to do for memory. I added the, I already have this mounted on there, I added the 258 gig mSATA on here, and that's where I'll put my operating system. I'm going to be adding a 1 terabyte hybrid SSD disk hybrid, and then I'm going to make the first part of a RAM drive. That's another thing about MSI's Command Center, is that you can create a RAM drive off of your any of the hard drives, but I'm going to create it on the number 1 or first hard drive, and then I can put everything there. So if I do have an mSATA problem, I think that's a problem, I can disconnect it and then I'm up and running. And if that's it, then I can either replace the mSATA or rebuild it, depending upon what I need to do. Optical drives, the cost difference between optical drives and non-optical drive is negligible in my opinion. Optical drives tend to last longer unless you just scrape them to death. So it's well worth buying the Blu-ray optical drive. And if you're going to do some writing, which you usually probably do for backups and stuff, get at least 1 read writer. Okay, I like disc-to-disc transfers, so I'm going to get 2. Monitors, again, we talked about monitors. I already have 3 hands-free 36-inch HDMI monitors, and so I already have that. Fans should be another thing. That goes into cooling, but cooling I'm more talking about CPU cooling and chassis stuff. Then last thing is lighting. One guy went in and he wanted to design a system around lighting. Okay, but lighting takes power away from everything else. I understand that. The more you put on here, the more power, and power is power. Okay, these high fans take power. Okay, 20 watt fans. That's a lot of power to add in. That's why I went with the other one. Okay, so again, you need to really think about it. But the first 6, 7 things I talked about, 7 things cooling, those you need to put the bulk of your budget into, in my opinion. Okay, and then go ahead and add these other things after you get it, and then you can play with price and find price. You can you need at least 1 terabyte hard drive. I suggest you get that, and then you can add onto it later. Now I'm putting in, you can't see it from where you are, but I'm putting in the Kingswind 3.5-inch hot swap chassis. Okay, because I do a lot of work. So if I do a project involving Adobe Illustrator and Movie Maker, that type of stuff, that project, I like to have it on 1 hard drive. And then and if I do another project, I can swap out. And that's nice because you can swap in and out 250s, 500s, 1 terabytes, not a big deal. If you don't want to go with it, don't buy SSDs, solid state devices, other than the mSATA on board. That was worth the cost. But don't bother buying as your primary drive. The reason being is they're too expensive for really what you get. Now I know you can go look at the bench test. Oh, it's really super speed. That's true. But cost-wise, if you factor in the dollar cost, you're better off to buy the SATA 3 7200 RPM hard drive. Okay, cost-wise, they're really good. It's cheaper to run. They will usually last for long. Go with a good one. Seagate's got a good one. A couple other ones. I tend to go with Seagate and there's one other I go with. I can't remember now what it is, but and then I really like their green. They're coming out now with the green. I'm not sure about that, but they have a black, and that's the 7200. It's a little bit more power draw than I like, but again, I'm running a 1500, so power is not really a big problem, and that's a nice thing because, like I said, that 5-year deal, you know, I can add the 3, 4, 7200 RPM terabyte on there and not worry about power because of that guy. So I've built into my system with what I've designed right off the bat, these 7 areas, something that should be really good for 5 years. I should not have to add anything. If I do, it's because I'm choosing to, and I don't have to upgrade my major components, and these are the major components. And that's really what you want to do. And that's why there's the negative, positive expandability. It's a positive for me not to have to upgrade my major components in the first 5 years. Okay, software-wise, I'm going to Windows 8.1. I hated Windows 8, too many problems, but they came out with 8.1, Update 1, and it seemed to work really well. I like that they went to an app-oriented program versus the old Windows 7. I have Windows 7. I once they got the bugs out of that, but I'm using Windows 8 now also, and I really like 8.1. So, and gamers seem to like 8.1. They seem to kind of hate 8. So, but they seem to 8.1 seems to have fixed a lot of problems, and that goes back to what I said about don't buy the latest and greatest, because the companies need to work out the bugs, and that's what they really depend on you, the consumer, to do. So when you get something, you know, like the CPU, Windows, stuff like that, take the time to go ahead and click on, okay, I'll do feedback for a while. And I like to do that for about a year or so, so they get it in. And Microsoft, MSI, these guys, they're really good at you know, looking at the trends and fixing and coming out with hot fixes and stuff. And so I've been impressed with them over the last 10 years. So anyway, I hope this all helps. I'll be doing other stuff, talking about it. Next thing will be how to just look at your component, do a visual inspection, what to do, not to do. And so I hope I've given you some food for thought, and I hope this helps somebody out there. I know it's not going to help you pros, and you guys that think you're pros. But for the guys like me who are now catching up after about 10 years of being out of this stuff, I really appreciate you guys. I appreciate you, Jay. I appreciate the other ones I mentioned. I don't have their